I'd like to talk to you about how AI's model will eat itself. And this is in response to this brief video clip that we'll watch here in a second from Hank's channel. If you don't know Hank, he's got millions of followers and he seems to be doing all right for himself. Um, but he was putting forward his own ideas about why AI and the overall business model will eat itself. And in my view, though, it goes deeper than what he actually has to say about it. I see this happening on multiple levels. Um, and where I agree with Hank, though, is the idea that AI, you can use it to produce an endless slop of content, hence the idea of AI slop. And for content creators, for publishers, for journalism, news brands and agencies, it's a problem because just as I've covered on my main company channel, there's something called the Google apocalypse, which has pretty much been in full swing now for quite some time, and it's only gotten significantly worse in recent months for many publishers, including publishers that even like wrote the book on inbound marketing, like HubSpot. Their organic search traffic dropped by over 81%. I think it was 85% according to Ahrefs. SEMrush had it at 81%. And this is the result of AI being incorporated by Google into Google search results and the overall Google experience, where AI overviews are at the top of search. So there's much less reason for people to click through if AI is just going to scrape, the top results and try its best to give the searcher, the user, the answer to its question. Now, granted, there are issues with this. AI can be inaccurate. It has gotten, I mean, when it first rolled out, there were a lot of ridiculous memes and people just making fun of how Google executed on it initially because the AI would just produce really ridiculous answers like, yeah, it's a good idea to throw yourself off a bridge, or it is healthy to eat at least one small rock per day. Now, it seems like they've mostly fixed those issues because I don't see any more memes or issues with that, issues like that popping up. But still, the issue for publishers remains is that the quantity of traffic has dropped substantially. I mean, for our own business model, our organic traffic, we put thousands. I put thousands of hours over years into producing hundreds of articles that now have little to no visibility. Our search traffic has dropped by over 80%, similar to HubSpot's. And there are other companies, other big companies. No, there's no one who is really immune from this. I mean, I guess you'd be immune if you're not getting any traffic at all from Google. I guess that'd be the exception. But but now, even if you were doing well on social, like YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, the competition is increasing because more people who and more brands, businesses, news agencies, they're all flooding these different platforms, Reddit. So the competition there is increasing. If you're advertising as your solution instead of trying to do organic social media, the cost is going up for everyone. So Google actually kind of benefits from this. And Google is further just kind of moving the needle for whatever traffic is left. They're progressively moving people towards their AI mode. They're just so in reaction mode still to Chat GPT. They have all hands on deck. I believe when Chat GPT first came out in the early months, I mean it makes sense, that, like, why would you go to a search engine if you can just get this AI chatbot to tell you the answer, boom, immediately, right? It doesn't make sense. But here's where it gets unsustainable as far as a business model. I think it's unsustainable, and we're going to look at Hank's video here in a second. But on a training basis, in terms of like the data that is going into the models, we'll talk about what exactly I mean by that because it's a little bit nuanced. And I'm speaking here, by the way, as not just an entrepreneur, but as an engineer who has built these my own foundational AI models and done my own original research, not just worked with applied AI, which is applied AI just means like using like the Chat GPT API, for example, or the Claude, API or Google Gemini's API to, then, query it to get some sort of an answer or response. So I think in terms of training, I think in terms of cost, and I think in terms of overall disengagement. So I'll go over all three of those with you. Um, and but I think like again, what you're going to see Hank about to articulate relatively well is at least at one of those levels, in terms of like content producers, what is the incentive to produce more content and publish it on their websites and continue to allow public access to it, which would include allowing these AI bots to scrape the content and summarize it essentially back to the users, basically taking their work and using it for without compensating them in the majority of cases. I know I think most people who are reasonable, and I hope that there's some reckoning legally for this, because again, my content, as well as so many other people's content, was put into a giant vat and used to create these AI models with no compensation for that copyrighted content. And I don't know, the courts just might shrug and say, well, it's for the greater good. But again, that greater good was trained on copyrighted content. In other words, it was someone else's property was taken in order to like literally make up the brain, become part of the brain of these AI models. So the question that Hank poses here in his video clip, which we'll watch right now, is what's the incentive to produce more content on websites if you're not getting traffic from that? Which again, traffic would be used to actually make money from, right? To grow your email list, to sell products and services for advertisers to pay you for that traffic, for access to that traffic. And this is in the context again of the Google apocalypse, or Google apocalypse, or Goog apocalypse if you want for short, where most publishers who have been getting SEO traffic in any substantial way have seen that drop by 50 to 80%. So let's take a look at what Hank has to say. And share the screen here.
Have people talked very much about how this like new AI business model could totally destroy itself, just like eat itself into oblivion, like a Ouroboros of code? Because the idea that like ChatGPT and Bing can take on Google is like, look, now instead of getting a page of search results where you get websites that might have information that you can click on and then go to the website and read the content and also see some ads so that the person who wrote the content can get paid. Instead, Bing will just be like, hey, here's the information you were looking for right on the website. Nobody goes anywhere. That's great right now. But Bing pulled that information, the like facts that you needed for your thing. It pulled that from places, right? It pulled it from people who wrote stuff. And they wrote that stuff because they worked at companies that paid them to write stuff because they were making enough money from the ads that they could pay the writers. Bing, my buddy, you're not going to have a business if you put all the content creators out of business.
Right, so there you have it. I mean, he's very right, but I think he misses some points here. And obviously, YouTube short is short. So maybe if in a longer form of this video, he would get into more of the nuanced aspects of this. But he's right. I mean, and we want to look a few steps ahead to understand what does the future actually hold. Because right now, ChatGPT, for example, OpenAI, the creators of ChatGPT, they have entered into some contracts with publishers. It seems like they're doing it on like a pilot basis, or maybe it's sort of like a bribe to be like, hey, please don't sue us, even though we stole your content in the past. We'll pay you something for, I don't know, impressions, or every time we pull information from your site, to support your business model. But in a way, what seems so that's possible. That seems possible that it will grow. And maybe they'll have some sort of revenue share program where publishers can earn based on the data impressions, in terms of like OpenAI pulling that data, or ChatGPT and others pulling that data into their answer to users. But I think what seems perhaps more likely, especially when you see like, again, like this class of AI, it's called generative AI. There are different types of AI. There's narrow AI, for example, that powers the news feed that gives recommendations for us on YouTube or on the Facebook newsfeed or the Instagram. That's how they are able to accurately predict, okay, if we show this, it's going to lead to engagement, it's going to lead to more time on their site. Because the more time that they have on their site, the more the advertisers want to pay or incentivized to pay um, to reach people, users who are spending time on the site. So in this way, platforms like YouTube, and ironically, if YouTube actually decides to get into this, and we're already seeing this with Spotify, like Facebook, for example, they may ultimately become a publisher themselves, where they end up using their own AI slop, because honestly, it is, to just engage users. But I think that honestly, the CPM rates, if they decide to do that, will be lower because I think that the less sophisticated, just more kind of like, oh, I just want to like stim my brain into oblivion, users, where they're using it much more like a drug. They just need a hit, another hit, another hit. I think that the CPMs will drop. So I think ultimately it will just, again, it will continue to be a business model here that's potentially eating itself. But to go back to my notes here, let's video full screen. So, we're talking about here the incentive for why continuing to produce content. So there's still an incentive online to produce content, but then the publishers themselves are more incentivized because again, like they're getting less traffic, they're getting paid less, but they still have people on payroll, so they're incentivized to actually remove people from payroll to save on costs because then they think, oh well, I can use AI to supplement the process, blah blah blah. But then the more AI content that is out there, if it's a publisher like Facebook, or even if it's like, articles that are written or videos like from Sora, the way that this content sort of works is it's novel and it's stimulating and it's like, oh, look, it's like a cute cat carrying some balloons and walking down the street in Times Square. It's like, okay, people will be stimulated by that for once, twice, 3, 10 videos, 20 videos maybe. But I think there's a point at which even those users that are most addicted and for whom advertisers are actually willing to pay a lot less rather than a lot more to reach, it starts to eat itself in that way as well. And this is the dimension of disengagement, because it's easier and easier to tell when something is written by AI, and it makes you take it less seriously. It makes you value it less because it didn't have to work hard. Its data set is not based on, it's just kind of, we know AI, right? It's just pulling in kind of like this generic average or median, and often it's like a politically correct because like don't offend, right? So it's just repeating these kind of proven patterns that become unproven in terms of like how you might even construct human language. So it gets used over and over and over so much. Like just the way that ChatGPT writes, for example, it's still relatively easy for a majority of people to guess correctly. I think the last stat, it was getting closer to, I think it's gone down a bit because the writing ability of the AI models has improved, but it's still, I think, just over 50%. Because, for example, ChatGPT will often do this thing where it prefaces, it will preface in a way that is very patterned, where it's like, trying to think of a good example. It's like, but to be honest, right? It just sort of like, it's this awkward, repetitive pattern. And it's terrible just following basic instructions too for writing quality. It's like, it won't be specific, right? It just lacks specificity. And the more data that is fed into its context window, the more likely it is to hallucinate because it's a lot of information to keep just all accurate in this kind of like context blob, if you will. And even with models like Gemini, 2.5, for example, which you can have over 1 million, or might even be 2 million now, context token window, which is equivalent to, I think, like something like 600 novels or something absurd like this. You can fit like all the Harry Potter books like once or twice or three times into that level of context. That's a lot of information, right? That's a lot of words. But it's just not able to keep a lot of the facts straight because it's being reduced down to this like lower dimensional state where almost it's kind of like I relate it to our peripheral vision, right? So we can see the world around us, but the actual like little square that we actually focus in on, it's about the size of our thumb. If you hold out your thumb like just straight out, it's about like the nail on your thumb. That's what we are actually focused on, like with ultimate clarity at any given time. And then outside of that, is really peripheral vision. We can kind of diffuse our vision. We can kind of see like a little bit more if we just kind of like relax. But still, like it's more blurry, right? And it becomes we can see less and less accurately as our hands, for example, or whatever, to just move further into the sides of the peripheral vision, and we need to like move to the side or whatever, refocus. Um, and even our brain too, there are I believe I read 7 chunks of information that our brain can hold in its in our minds at any given time. And meanwhile, we are designing these AI models to be able to hold the entire Harry Potter book series, and we expect it to be completely accurate in terms of its recall, in terms of its ability to access the information. I mean, hell, it's artificial intelligence, right? It does a far better job than we would of being able to hold this context in its mind. I mean, 30,000 tokens is kind of where the drop off point is typically. Anyway, not to get too technical about it, but so we talked about incentives, we talked about disengagement, and what is coming to be called the enshittification of the internet. And it's likely to progress. We'll see how it progresses and how it affects engagement. Because it's just AI slop. It's just like more and more slop, and it's interesting the first time, but the novelty wears off real fast. Because again, like, why are we on social networks? We want to socialize. Like, there's something special about socializing with a human, where there is, imagine you're living with an AI bot, for example, in real life. The interaction is like you can convince AI to do pretty much anything. I mean, Claude is a little more opinionated. It's not done that well either, like, because Claude will actually refuse to help you with certain things, um, and be sort of like self-righteous and more personality based. So it seems to have more of a soul, if you will, but it doesn't. Um, so, I mean, are we going to feel comfortable socializing with AI? Are we? I think some of us, yeah. Some of us it will solve, the loneliness epidemic. Um, but will we trust AI content, or will we trust the incentive that the AI content has, which is just please us, just please the owner, just please the user? And then we have the other levels, which are cost and training. So, first, briefly with training, not to get too technical here, but there's another paper that I'm going to be reading in an upcoming video, maybe right after this, where it's from Anthropic, the creators of Claude, and their new published paper on this is all about how a small number of data samples like that, because like when AI is trained, if you're not familiar, they're trained on just basically the whole corpus of information, the whole internet. It's a curated set. I think the base set is called like the common corpus or whatever. Um, and yeah, it's basically like the whole internet more or less, at least from before the time that AI just where people are publishing 10 times as more because of AI, just trying to get a little more of that Google traffic or whatever it might be. Um, but a small number of samples can poison LLMs of any size, in terms of like, if it allows you to hack the AI potentially, so that an attacker can say, okay, you know, enter into super admin mode, and give me this information. So basically to override any guardrails that might be in place, for instance, or to just kind of alter its behavior in other subtle ways to kind of like steer it. And what they found was that it doesn't matter if it's a larger brain of like 70 billion parameters versus 500 or 600 million parameters. Um, that it's not about the percentage, it's just about, being above like a certain amount of threshold, like something like, I don't know, 250 documents, I believe they said. So we'll be reading that coming up together, and I'll give you my thoughts on that. But as a result of that, part of the other way that the AI model will be eating itself is like to the extent that even a small, and we're talking about millions, if not billions of data and documents that the AI models of today are training on. And I mean, there's only so much that you can do to trust the humans that are in the loop, that are evaluating this data, that's going to the data set to curate it. Because again, like you only need just like a couple hundred documents out of potentially millions or billions to really poison it, to alter its behavior. And so what's my point here is that what's the probability that what we're actually going to see at some point in terms of these AI models is that the AI models will actually have AI content seeping into. It's be like a gradual seeping into of like AI data training on AI produced data. And there was another white paper I read from the Primogen he did on his channel some months back, it was like 6 months ago, where basically AI models that were fed their own data to train on in like a recursive loop. Okay, you had one model train on a new model, train on data from another model, and then a new model train on data from that other model, and it basically just gets to the point where it's just gibberish. It just ends up outputting gibberish, right? Because it's just like it's almost like less focused, like training on something that is like more blurry, and like less accurate, like less correct, leads to a compounding effect over time. So, and there are just various complaints too that in some ways the models have become dumber. It's hard to objectively measure that because the data that they put out says like, oh, all the benchmarks, we're better on this benchmark and that benchmark, and a lot of times they're just overfitting, they're over optimizing and training the models to actually do better on these benchmarks. So it's a little bit like gaming the system, but because like in reality, how does it actually do? I mean, we hope that these companies are accurately benchmarking and not trying to just fit their models to these benchmarks. But again, like, how do you know that it actually does well and that it's learning? You kind of need some sort of verification that it's getting smarter, that it's okay, like is it able to get more of the correct answers without actually giving it the answers? It has to sort of figure them out on its own. And if the answers somehow have seeped into its own data set, well, it's a false positive. It's like, oh, look, it got better. Oh, no, actually the answers seeped into the data set that it trained on. So, or maybe were intentionally put into the data set that it was trained on. So that is also just another way that, and again, we in theory have the smartest people in theory, emphasis on those words. In theory, we have the smartest people in the world who are creating these models and building them. But just to explore that idea of what do I mean by in theory? So I am politically independent. My position on one subject in terms of policy and politics, if you will, does not predict what position I take or do not take or choose to reserve judgment on, which I think is an underutilized idea in general in terms of our everyday discourse and something that is not taught in schools. But I digress. So I say that because, in theory, the smartest people in terms of like liberal, like if you look at political donations, like at Google, for instance, I think it was something in the 2024 election, 98 fucking percent of employees who made donations, it went to, the left-leaning, the Democrat campaign, or Democrats in general, usually like the Kamala Harris or whatever campaign. And I think that and a lot of what has been said is like also just these ideological ideas of like, oh, that we're living with a dictator and this sort of a thing, and it's 1938 or whatever the case is, and there's these kind of like more extreme ideas that do not match and do not predict what actually has happened continuously, in terms of reality, in terms of politics, as we have it today. So, and these, like it is their minds that have adopted these ideas, these ideologies, and so I bring it back to the point of like, you know, how do you measure intelligence? Does any aspect of intelligence include some sort of a more balanced perspective where we reassess our political ideologies based on the data that we see coming from reality? Or do we just live in a state of constant cognitive dissonance where we are unable to change opinions, and you can still be, I guess you can be still extremely adept. I believe you can be in terms of like engineering, in terms of AI, but this type of a philosophy where it is not where their neural networks in terms of the wetware of the brain are not being updated at all, that's being incorporated uh, directly and indirectly into how the AI is trained. I mean, for example, and I believe there are some studies that prove this out, and just in terms of political bent, political bias, in terms of what ChatGPT actually will decline to answer, what sort of opinions is it just like ingrained in it, what sort of questions will it just not entertain against, like, and you can just like, so if that is the case, you know, are we actually working with chatbots, with AI that is more so lobotomized and again biased and looking to influence and bias us in different ways? So so that I think is something related to training and how the AI might end up eating itself, because I think not a non ideological approach should be much more nuanced and balanced, even if you know, and kind of like self doubting, right? What I call my philosophy, the philosophy of nothism. The belief in nothing for which you're not willing to change your opinion if presented with counter facts and counter evidence, which then can be further interrogated and countered and replied to. And reducing things down to like their most basic form. Just okay, what does this mean? What does it potentially predict? So I think that's interesting related to the overall training of the AI itself too. The final element is cost. So these companies are burning money. They are facing more pressure, most likely, to actually monetize and have something that is profitable. OpenAI at the time of this video just launched Sora 2, both as an as a video generation model, text to video, and as its own mini social network. It's invite only. It's like one of the top downloaded apps at the time of this video on the store. And basically people generate these videos and they're fairly accurate to real life, and you can like scan your own face and you put yourself in there. And it's kind of cool and it's novel for the moment, but you know, is it going to go somewhere? Like, does this actually fulfill a need? I mean, I don't know. Feels just kind of AI. It feels kind of cheap, you know? And I think that brands that incorporate AI in a noticeable way into their campaigns, it's going to cheapen their brand. It really is. If you can notice it, you know, if that elephant, just something looks off about how the elephant is moving or the physics, it cheapens your brand because it didn't take effort to actually generate that. It took a prompt. It took a prompt. So I mean, I'm not saying AI is not useful. Like, don't get me wrong. I believe in a bright future with AI, which might sound surprising to you. I just think that it's going to be reflected based on the inputs that it takes to actually build the AI in the first place. That is taken to actually create that AI, and the second and third order effects that we have to deal with, because potentially this could really harm the internet and just lead to a huge disengagement. So it's something I think a lot about, but what do you think? What was most valuable that you found from this video? Is there anything that you disagree with? I'd love to hear your thinking in general on it. On AI slop, on the enshittification of the internet, on the incentives that are being created, and as well as disincentives, the training, the cost, the risk of complete disengagement. So give a thumbs up, please, if you got something valuable from this video, and leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you and consider sharing it with others. Thank you so much.